College Recruiting Weekly podcast and Tudor University is presenting another Coach to Coach segment, and we have a good one here today to talk to us about that. Coach to Coach is meant to really be a conversation with coaches for their fellow college coaches, helping them find success and also avoid some of the pitfalls that they experienced in their career. So we're joined today by a coach who has had some ups and downs like most coaches, Matt Doherty, former coach at UNC, many other places. We'll get into that. But Coach, thanks for being a part of this and contributing time and just offering your expertise to thousands of college coaches out there.
This is an NIL deal, right? So I'm getting some money off of this, right? This is name, image,
talk.
and okay. We'll
have,
talk.
Have your people call my people.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, gotcha. No, thank you for having me on the show.
No, thanks for devoting some time to it.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of coaches are going to appreciate that. So I'm going to just jump right in.
Yeah,
for
let's do it.
anybody that wants more information, you Google Matt Doherty basketball or coaching, and you'll be busy for a weekend.
Just go. My website's dohertycoaching.com. That's DOHERTY coaching.com.
Nice.
Thank you.
So, quick background. As a player at UNC, played with Michael Jordan, James Worthy, Sam Perkins, great team, won a national championship. You get drafted afterwards by the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Right.
You get cut.
Right.
And then you do what almost every other coach does. You walk away from basketball and go to Wall Street. I want to start with that because it's such an interesting transition, especially what you have talked about learning from that experience.
Yeah.
But what was that like, and what were you expecting going in, and what was reality, and what did you learn from that part of your career?
Yeah, well, growing up on Long Island, I dreamed about playing in the NBA, the Knicks and the Nets. I mean, Dr. J was playing 5 miles from my house, Rick Barry, and then, the great Knick teams. I was blessed to have great coaches. Bob McKillop, the coach at Davidson, was my high school coach my first 2 years, then Dick Zeitler. We won championships, and I was highly recruited. Played at North Carolina, started 3 years, and, you think you start 3 years at North Carolina, you have a pretty good chance of playing in the NBA. But back then, there were 9 rounds. Okay, now there's only 2. And I remember draft day was June 1984. I think it was the 19th. And I was speaking at a camp, Campbell University now, 700 campers. And I tell this story all the time. The draft starts early. So I don't know if it's before lunch, after lunch, but it wasn't at night, not like it is now. And obviously the first round picks go to New York. And I remember going to a payphone at the camp, at Campbell, this little gym in Campbell College back then, getting the quarters out, calling a basketball office. Linda Woods, who was Dean Smith's secretary, ended up ironically working with me when I was the head coach. And I'd call and say, hey, Linda, any news yet? No news yet. Hang up the phone. I was obviously concerned. I thought I was going to be drafted by the 3rd round for whatever reason. So that's the feedback that Coach Smith was giving me. And I don't know, 20 minutes later, quarter 919, 962, 1154, no news. Now I'm really shaken. It's time for me to go speak in front of these campers. Largest camp in the country, 700 campers. And I've got to speak in front of these campers and stay present. And I started to get in the flow. And as I got into the flow of talking to these campers, there's a tap on my shoulder. I turn around, it's the camp director. I lean my ear, he pulls me down to him. He says, Cleveland, 6th round. Cleveland had the worst team in the NBA. They were so bad they called them the Cleveland Cadavers. The 6th round, nobody makes it from the 6th round. I was devastated. I would have been better off if he didn't tell me at that time. And so tears, I'm fighting back tears. My legs are shaking. I'm just trying to keep my composure in front of these campers. And then everything else is a blur. I remember getting home and to my apartment in Chapel Hill. And the next morning, we had radio alarm clocks back then. whatever, 9 o'clock, alarm goes off, 8 o'clock, whatever it was. And it goes to the local radio station. They say, in local sports, ACC player, ACC players in the NBA draft, and it goes down. And third round, Rick Carlisle, Boston Celtics. And Rick and I were contemporaries. Now he's the head coach of the Pacers.
Right.
And I started to cry. That was my spot. I was supposed to be drafted in the third round by the Celtics. And I wasn't drafted to the sixth round. And I went to camp, got cut. I wasn't good enough to make it. The reality is, looking back, I wasn't good enough. I wasn't a good enough athlete. I didn't have a transferable skill.
But still, you were a starter at UNC, and I'm wondering, as you tell that story, were you facing, really, every athlete goes through challenges, but was that sort of the first hard blow?
No,
just
the first blow was getting, cut. I tried out for the Olympic team. So we had Olympic trials, and they were picking 3 teams. The Olympic team, the Pan Am team, and a third team. And I made a third team. And now there were good players on it.
Right.
Guys who were Olympians, like Vern Fleming. They had Otis Thorpe on that team. Charles Barkley was at this trial. John Stockton, Leon Wood, Michael Jordan, the best of the best. And I was at that tryout. But, you want to make the Olympic team. I wasn't good enough. And so that's really when I first was starting to get cut or, tiered to a third tier player. And, it's starting to humble yourself. And I always thought about having a backup plan. And, I wanted to be a good student athlete. I believed in that. I was a business major and thought that, there were some players that played at North Carolina who went on to Wall Street, a guy named Tommy Kearns, who played in the 57 national championship team, legend at North Carolina and legend on Wall Street. So I'm thinking, all right, always like to have what's next. You can't play basketball forever. So I had a summer internship on Wall Street, and I thought, if basketball doesn't work out, I'll work on Wall Street. I never thought about coaching.
So what was that experience like? Because talk about a shift in your world and daily life, going from college basketball player in North Carolina to now Wall Street.
Yeah.
Even though you may have envisioned it, it was probably ended up being a lot different on the inside than you realized.
Yeah. The thing I liked about it was the competitiveness, the locker room mentality, the energy of a trading floor. I was selling bonds. You keep score, you have high highs, low lows, and people can make a lot of money. And you had to be driven by money. And I think that at first I thought I was driven by money, but I wasn't. And I ended up hating it. I didn't like selling bond yields. That did not excite me. And I think for young people, and it's ironic because Billy Donovan, after he was done he played like 1 year with the Knicks, he too was working on Wall Street. A lot of athletes on Wall Street, very transferable, competitive, high energy.
Right.
It was funny because we both left. And I tapped my boss on the shoulder after 4 years and said, I'm leaving. And he said, what time are you coming back? And I said, no, I'm out. And I quit. And I moved to Charlotte thinking I was going to get in the real estate business. And I started coaching an AAU team. I was asked to coach an AAU team. I never thought I'd want to be a coach. And I fell in love with it. And that then led me to, I was doing the radio at Davidson at the time, led me to Bob McKillop became the new coach, and he hired me.
As the assistant.
Yeah.
Right.
But working on Wall Street, you sometimes now figure out what you like and what you don't like. And I didn't like selling intangible product.
Did you find, though, that there was a certain skill set you had to do it, even though you maybe didn't like it, that maybe transferred later to recruiting? Because at a certain level, recruiting is sales.
Yeah. I think what I learned from it, there's this book called Range, and I tell young people that your life's impacted by 3 things: the people you meet, the books you read, and the trauma in your life. So what are you reading? Who are you intentionally trying to meet? And then the trauma, losing a job, losing a loved one, learning from those experiences. And so I've read a couple of years ago a book called Range, and it talked about, don't look at a wide swath of experiences like careers, and some people have had different careers, as a bad thing, because you can take something from everything and build on who you are today and what you're doing. So I look back on my job at Wall Street. I quit probably before I got fired because I wasn't good at it. Would I be good at it today? Yeah, I'd be good at it today.
What aspects back then were you not good at as a young person?
I wasn't passionate about selling bonds.
Okay.
I wasn't mature enough to, I didn't have any real need to be committed to it. I wasn't married. I didn't have debt. I asked Tommy Kearns, why is he so successful? He said, how'd you get to be so successful? He said, get married, have a kid, buy a house.
That'll do it.
Yeah. Now, what do you have no choice.
Right.
I mean, a good person has no choice.
Right.
A person with no ethics or, commitment has choices. Right. They could leave the marriage and leave the kid and, go bankrupt. But if you have some competitiveness and internal pride, you are going to realize I've got to get up and work my butt off.
Right.
And so I didn't have that. And so I think that, again, going back to being passionate about what you sell. And so I wasn't a good bond salesman, but I was an excellent recruiter because I was passionate about what I was selling.
Right.
Scholarship opportunity at Davidson, building Davidson, Kansas as an assistant, being the head coach at Notre Dame, North Carolina.
Right.
I can sell in a competitive market, and I enjoyed that. But I enjoyed selling something that's a little more tangible.
Right. So you're an assistant coach at Davidson, like you mentioned, at Kansas under Roy Williams, and you're going through developing your career. I'm wondering what, as you were doing those things at those levels, Division I levels, smaller Division I at Davidson, larger at Kansas with a lot of focus on men's basketball, obviously. What were some of the things that you learned you needed to learn about the non-basketball, the non-sports side of the business? Because I think a lot of coaches go in because I love to coach or I love my sport, and they soon realize that, there's another 90% of the job that I didn't realize I needed to learn.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I quit drinking when I worked on Wall Street. I was miserable. I was depressed. I jokingly said I was an all-city drinker. I admitted to being an alcoholic. I sought counseling. So I became sober in like 1986, 87, and 11 years later, I was the head coach at Notre Dame. So I talk about decisions. You make decisions and you deal with the consequences, and made a decision that I needed help, and I sought it, and was blessed, really blessed to be able to stop drinking like that. Went to AA, that was, people look back and what's the thing you're most proud of in your life? And before I went public with that, I wouldn't say it. Now that's the thing I'm most proud of, because that's an addiction that I was able to kick. And because of that decision, I had a successful coaching career. I met my wife. My wife would not have dated me if I was drinking. Boom, 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 boom. And so it starts with that, and that's a God thing. And so then the business background, I always was curious. I think curious is such a great quality. Someone called me a lifelong learner. I never heard that term. That was 20 years ago. So being curious, like why? How can we do it better? What from business can I apply to coaching to make me a better coach? And having been exposed to being a business major in college and working on Wall Street, phone sales. Like I had to be good at phone sales. And things I learned on Wall Street, like I say it to even today, once you get the sale, once you get the order, hang up.
Right.
Don't oversell it.
Right.
Right? Because you've seen people who say, "Oh, Dan, thanks for committing. You'll really be happy because we will deliver A, B, and C." And you're like,
continue to sell.
A, B, and C. I don't want A, B, and C.
Right.
Like, once you get the order, hang up, and then announce it, and then just being able to sell on the phone, being organized, preparing the phone call. Wall Street Wells talked about add value to your phone call. Don't just call somebody and say, "Hey, just checking in, Dan, how's it going?" No, add value, because that person is getting a lot of phone calls from other people. So, what can I do to add value to your day? Hey, Dan, I just want you to know our economist thinks that interest rates are going to spike 1 point this week. So it'd be a good time to buy some bonds. Okay, Matt, thanks. While you're at it, buy me 10 million long bonds. Okay, good. Boom, done. As opposed to, hey, Dan, just checking in, what's going on? I'm wasting your time.
Right.
And so, when I call a recruiter or a high school coach, can I add value? Hey, maybe give a coach an out of bounds play, or this is what we do, and a drill. A player send something that is not just a meaningless, hey, thinking of you, here's a book. Have you ever thought about reading this book? Or here's a quote from Michael Jordan, so trying to add value to the engagements that you have, especially over the phone.
So a lot of qualities that you brought in from what you learned on Wall Street over to the coaching and recruiting side. As you were going through that assistant coach experience at both schools, were there things that you realized you had underestimated in any aspect of doing the job as an assistant coach? Were there things that you walked into that maybe thought you were good at and, I need to be better at it, that even maybe one of the coaches demanded of you?
Cheating. Wasn't good at cheating. And I was blessed to work at Davidson, at Kansas, at Notre Dame, North Carolina, where that wasn't part of the fabric. And I think that I really struggled with schools that cheated. And, I felt that trying to navigate that was difficult for me, because I know that coach was doing something, or that program was doing something, and they were successful, and so that's something that I really probably struggled with the most.
On the flip side, you were, I think, known, and there's some stories about being a very good and creative recruiter, and in terms of how you communicated, stayed in touch. Did that seem to come natural to you, or was it, or was there some trial and error involved?
Yeah, I think, I think it's, I'm pretty good at connecting quickly with people, building a trust, building a relationship. And
naturally good, or did you have to, was that something that you
no,
learned?
I think naturally. Yeah, okay. Naturally. I do a lot of assessments, DISC assessments, Myers-Briggs assessments, and that goes back to bringing the business side to basketball. I knew that I had, being Irish Catholic, on Long Island, you were forced to be an extrovert. So I had that bent. And, when I'm passionate about selling something and then a competitive market and, I'm recruiting against you and we're trying to get that player, I'm going to beat you. So how can I beat you? Well, I got to develop a good relationship with that player. And I was good at that and enjoyed it. And then the creative side is fun. That's selling. And, how do you stand out, stand out in style? Having an understanding. I talk to people about this now, in sales, like, what's too much, what's not enough. So now you got to know your customer, right? So if I meet you, I've got to quickly assess, like in a DISC profile, is dominant, influencer, steady, conscientious, and the dominant person likes to doesn't like to be told what to do.
Likes to dominate.
Yeah, so now I don't dominate as much and maybe allow you, as a kid, it's a little different. But, are you driving the show, or now I got to let you and understand that? Are you more social and influencer that likes the give and take? Are you steady, somebody who's a little bit more, doesn't like change and takes a little bit longer to earn a trust, or someone who's conscientious who wants data, like data? I needed some data, and I wanted to drive the process as a player. And I think there was an advantage that I had in recruiting in that I was highly recruited, by North Carolina, Duke, Virginia, Notre Dame. And I knew what I liked in the recruiting process and what I didn't like. And so you really have to understand your customer first, and then within the parameters of who you are as a person and organization, address that, but don't step beyond your boundaries, because then you're not authentic.
Right.
Like, how can you stay authentic within your guardrails and connect with the client?
And connection, authenticity, keys in recruiting. One of the things that we've learned in our 20 years of working with coaches is it is so important for that recruit, for you as a coach, to differentiate yourself, that they're actually making a lot of decisions based on not what a program has, because at your level, at that level you were recruited and you coached, everybody has a lot of the same things. Right. I'm almost looking as the recruit for differences. Did you see a lot of that and did you sort of pick up on that?
Yeah. Well, I picked up on it as a player.
Yeah.
And I use this all the time. And as an executive coach, I quote Dean Smith more now as an executive coach than I did when I was a basketball coach. I call it the organizational triangle. So every organization is made up of talent, systems, and culture. And the better your systems, the better your culture, the better talent you attract, the better talent performs, the better talent you retain. However, you could have great systems and great talent, but if your culture is bad, nothing else matters. So I say culture is king, right? Because we've seen teams that have good systems and good talent, but they underperform because they have a poor culture. On the flip side, we've seen teams that have average talent, average systems, great culture, and perform at a high level. And I look back to Jim Valvano in 1983. He didn't have elite talent. He had good talent, but no first team All-American. He had one player who played a long time in the NBA, Thurl Bailey. They had systems was very average. I mean, their defense wasn't very, they played triangle, they junked it up a lot. Their offense wasn't very complicated. Culture was elite. Those guys would run through a wall for him.
Yeah.
And that's why they won.
Right.
And then we've seen teams that have elite talent and good systems, but they're dysfunctional because there's no chemistry. And so culture is king. So when Coach Smith, there's the power of, someone used the term pulling someone across the trap. Okay. And it all is like dating. It goes back to dating, right? So Coach Smith, home visit. Everyone else is implying that I'm probably going to play a lot as a freshman, if not saying it outright. And he sits back, legs crossed, very confident, talking about the core values, how they play, team basketball, the system. And, it came up to playing time. He looked at me and he said, you'll be lucky to play by the time you're a junior. And I leaned forward and I said to myself, I'll show you. I leaned forward. He wanted to create that gap. He wanted to drag me into the trap. Now, if I wasn't going to bite on it, he didn't want me.
Right.
Because he wants someone that's competitive enough to say, yeah, I'll show you. And he wanted somebody that also would understand that I'm not going to give you anything. You're going to have to earn it. And so that when I'm a freshman and not playing, don't complain because I told you in a home visit, you probably weren't going to play till you're junior. Right. So I was really drawn to that. and I use that in sales now.
And I think a lot of athletes are, just because that general competitive nature, if they're good.
Right.
And yet the default setting for most coaches is overpromise. I have to show you all the stuff that we have and look at this, and that's their view of sales.
Right.
And what you're talking about, what Coach Smith did, and what you've learned in the executive coaching that you do, which will be, for the people that are watching, a separate segment we'll be doing over on Tudor University to go through everything that he's doing now as an executive coach and author and speaker, and there's some opportunities for people to engage with you that way. But that's the default setting, like I said, but you're not incorporating psychology and human nature.
Right. So I have a podcast, the Rebound podcast, and I was interviewing Jim Delaney. And this is what you need to do in sales. As a recruiter, you're a salesman. You need to build your funnel so that your backup is not a considerable drop-off to your first player. So you have your A list, B list, C list, and hopefully your B list is not a huge drop-off. So that way you don't have to act desperate in recruiting, because once desperation comes through and it's not very attractive. No. And, I go back to the dating thing, the pretty girl in school, and you're like, desperate to go out with her. Well, she senses that. So the best thing is say, hey, you'd be lucky to go out with me.
Right.
And turn around, walk away, or, hey, I'd love to go out with you, but, if you're not interested, I get it, like no big deal, and walk away and talk to another girl.
Right.
And so it's same thing in recruiting. So Jim Delaney, who's the commissioner of the Big Ten, played at North Carolina from New Jersey. And so we're talking about Coach Smith. And now he's being recruited in the 60s, like they're early to mid. I think he played at Carolina like 66, 65, 66, 67. So he's a good player being recruited by Rutgers and schools like that, but he's not like a national top recruit. He'll say this. So the end of the home visit in Jersey, and Coach Smith breaks out the scholarship papers and says, Jim, we'd love you to sign with us. And Jim says, yeah, I appreciate that. I just would really like to look at this one other school. And Coach Smith says, oh, that's fine. That's fine. No problem. We're going to on a flight tomorrow to Chicago, and we're meeting with another two guard, and we'll be offering this scholarship. And Delaney's like, wait a second. And he takes the papers back and commits. When I was being recruited by North Carolina, I visited early. It was October. It was my third visit. Visited Duke, Virginia, North Carolina. Supposed to visit Notre Dame. And at the end of my visit, Eddie Fogler, the assistant who went on to coach at South Carolina and Vanderbilt, said to me, he said, just so you know, Clark Bynum's coming in next week. Now, Clark was a 6'8" white guy like me from Sumter, South Carolina. I knew Clark. I knew he was a good player, very similar. And I'm thinking, so on the flight home, I'm thinking, what if Clark comes and commits on the spot? Now, we had 2 scholarships for the wings. So I get off the plane in LaGuardia. My mom said to me, before I said anything, she said, you're going to Carolina, aren't you? I said, yeah. So I called Coach Smith that Wednesday and committed. I wanted Clark to know that I was at North Carolina first. So if he wanted to come, he's going to have to beat me out.
Yeah.
That was a play.
Yeah.
That was intentional it was probably the truth, but it was also intentional. You're stacking up your recruits so that way I'm putting the squeeze. You're creating leverage. Because you got to close.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I wasn't even thinking about asking you, but you dove into this area, and I think it's so fascinating because your story as a recruit mimics what we see today. And I think, again, it goes back to just basic human nature that hasn't changed in the last 40 or 50 years at our core, especially as athletes. And a lot of the training we center around is, coach, if we're working with a coach, we're telling them, you have to control the process.
That's right.
You have to be the one to lead them.
That's right.
And to your point, when you take back the scholarship papers and you're okay with losing that athlete, you're creating that vacuum.
You're pulling them into the trap.
You are pulling them into the trap. But really what you're doing, because you probably wouldn't say that Dean Smith forced you to go or pressured you to go. What he did was create an environment where you gave yourself a reason almost to commit, and because
leadership, there's a fine line. Leadership, a friend of mine says, good leadership is manipulation with good intent. Sales is manipulation with good intent. Like there are salespeople who are corrupt, who are bad people.
Coaches also.
Yes, yes, and so, but like if I want to get you to, I want you, and I know it's good for you. I know it's a good fit, but I got to get you to say yes.
Right.
I got to get you to close. I've got to create leverage. It's got to be leverage created, and I've got to surround you. So whenever you turn, you're going to want validation on this sale, on this commitment. Whether it's, as an adult, your wife, as a youngster, your high school coach, your best friend. So you need to be I need to surround you. So when you go to your high school coach or your mom or your AAU coach or your girlfriend, what do you think about North Carolina? I think that's a good place. Boom, validation, done. And I got to put a little squeeze on you. And that's the thing sometimes people are a little uncomfortable doing, but I got to put you in the vise and turn the screw a little bit to let you know you're not in control.
Right.
Like I want you, but I don't have to have you.
And that's such an important.
And I've got somebody to take your spot if you say no, and I'll give you till Friday. And if you don't commit to us by Friday, I'm going to offer the scholarship to Matt.
So we talk about recruits being largely driven by the idea in our research that we've done, focus group studies that we've done with recruits, where they almost, how we would frame it is that they decide with their heart, but then they have to be able to justify it with their head.
Oh, yeah.
And so for you, so we hear a lot of stories about illogical ways athletes choose their schools.
Yeah.
How did you know? Do you remember the instant you realized, okay, I want to be at North Carolina?
Yeah, I'm very analytical to a fault, and I had a spreadsheet that I created on a legal pad, and it weighted things. It had the schools, and it had academics, playing time, location, conference. Boom, boom, boom. What's the most important thing? Maybe academics is 2x, chance to win a national championship 2x. So I weighted different things. But then at the end of the day, okay, that helps you narrow down the schools. Right. North Carolina, Duke, Virginia, Notre Dame, basically the 4 schools.
Right. So basically it's a 4-way tie for first place according to your spreadsheet.
Yeah, then the home visit,
right,
and then the campus visit. And I think then it becomes a feeling. Like you fall in love.
Right.
Right? Like, yeah, I want to fall in love with a tall blonde who comes from a wealthy family, who has great genes and will produce, well, you're not buying a horse.
Yeah, looks good on the spreadsheet.
But you fall in love with somebody. So, but you want to put yourself in a pool where you are, your second choice, your third choice, they were all good choices, but the fit is so key, and that comes through feeling. But
I think also, Coach, that 4-way tie, I think a lot of athletes do a version of what you just described, and they go on their 4 visits, 5 visits, or however many now that they want to do. And all of what we tell coaches and what the athletes have told us is that by the time we're visiting your school, we're about 80% there. We're in our mind, this could be one of the places. I'm not going to go usually visit a place that just totally I don't want. And so that, I think, becomes more incumbent on the coach then to create the environment, the visit, those little psychological moments that differentiate themselves to say, okay, we're the one. So for you, what was that emotional sort of maybe slightly illogical fall in love moment where you realized UNC's the one? Because you told your mom getting off the plane.
Yeah,
your answer was, I'm going there.
North Carolina was like above the others in my mind, because they were in the top 10 every year. Dean Smith just coached the Olympics. It was interesting because that's where you have to know your customer. You have to know your customer. And the other schools, they were in session, they had football games, blah, blah, blah. Carolina's on fall break. Students weren't there. There was not a home football game, but they did start practice. I got to watch practice. And I sat there and took notes during practice. And I think Coach Smith made note of that, like I was the only recruit that ever took notes in practice. And I'm sitting there taking notes, and I freaking love everything they're doing because I was blessed to play for Bob McKillop and Dick Zeitler that were great high school coaches, that I could do what he's asking that team to do. I understood why he was doing things. I could see myself in this system and fitting in this system. And then I got to just hang out with Michael Corn for a couple of days. Michael Corn was my favorite player. Number 31. I wore 31 in high school. Mike started on the national Final Four team at North Carolina. He was 6'7" white guy from New Jersey. I'm a 6'7" white guy from Long Island. Played similar. He was a better athlete, better player than I was. But I got to see that he was real guys. They were good guys. And I could see myself being with those guys, playing for Dean Smith in that system.
So you used the term hang out with him. And so people that are listening to this podcast, watching it, Tudor University, they've done a workshop with us, their clients, whatever, that will ring familiar with them because we preach pretty hard that according to the data, the athletes will tell us when we're on a campus visit, the majority of time, and nationally about 65% of the time, if they had to create a visit, it would be to hang out with, especially some of the younger players that maybe they're closer in age with.
That's right.
And a lot of coaches push back on that. No, they got to see our stuff. They have these meetings. And you're shaking your head. So
less is more.
But what is it about just being able to hang out with another athlete? By the time you're on the campus visit and it's close and you're looking for a difference.
A kid's not going to, listen, you have to do certain things, like see a classroom and tour the campus, but at the end of the day. Real quick. You use the term, I have to, you have to, versus I want to hang out, well, here's what I have to do. And there's there's that push-pull of. Like I met with a math professor. I thought I wanted to major in math. Right. I met with a math professor. I was fighting to stay awake. You know what I mean? And the math professor said something, and Eddie Fogel was with us. I went to Mass. I'm Catholic. My mom was concerned about me losing my faith going south for college. Right. Irish Catholic kid going to North Carolina back then. All right. So Coach took me to had one of the players take me to Mass. Mm-hmm. But the real connection is going to be with your teammates.
Right.
And how nice the locker room is, how nice the campus is. Those are secondary things. But do I get along with my teammates? And do they like it there?
And do they like you or seem to like you?
Yeah. And so a lot of times after visit, we're going to ask the players, would you like to play with this guy? Sometimes we'll tell, and, Coach Smith would say, hey, we're going to ask our players if they want you in the program.
Right.
So that's another thing. Like, I'm going to lean into that. I got to show, put my best foot forward.
Right.
So I want to be part of this program, meaning it's not automatic.
Right.
Like,
a little bit of competition.
Competition, but also I'm vetting you.
Right.
Just because I'm recruiting you right now, there may be, it's so backwards now. Kids want to collect scholarships before you barely talk to them.
Right.
You may send them a text. Well, are you offering?
Right.
So now you have to play the game. Yeah, I'm offering.
Right.
But knowing I could pull it at any second,
Right.
because you'll pull it at any second. You haven't committed to me, and I'm not committing to you, but I'll offer you a scholarship. So I might have 50 offers out there, knowing I don't have 50 scholarships.
Right.
But I can pull that quickly. If you come on a visit and act like a jerk and my players don't like you, you're done.
Right. Right. So appreciate you diving down that rabbit hole with me. With your assistant head coaching experience, we're talking about recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the most important part of developing a program, is who you recruit? Because I think it seems to go back to culture, certainly talent. Is that at the crux of what makes you, as a coach at the college level, successful?
Yes.
Your opinion? Yes?
Oh, heck yeah. You can't make chicken salad out of chicken.
You know what? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you need talent. And so you got to be able to attract talent.
Right.
And I think, you have to be able to sell. Now, there's integrity selling, which is actually a way to sell. It's a branded way to sell. Fit is so important that, so yeah, you have to be able to sell and recruit. If you can't, you won't be successful. I don't care how good a coach you are.
We have a lot of assistant coaches that are no doubt watching, listening. What would you say are the top 2 or 3 things you learned as an assistant that are so important for an assistant coach to do well, to as they grow their
be
career?
organized.
Okay.
Control what you can control. Are you organized? What does that look like? Well, are you, when you go to games and say national events, do you know what gyms you're going to? Do you know the rosters? Do you get there early? Do you take good notes? Are you focused on the game and not talking to the guy next to you? If you're talking to the guy next to you, looking at the game, not at the person talking to you, having that discipline, because you have to watch the play. And are you watching the kids, not only on the court, but off the court? Are they good teammates? Do they stand up for their teammates? Do they pout when the coach is taking them out? Do they throw a towel? Do they kick the water, the Gatorade cooler? And then being aware, in the stands, who else is watching them? Where are the parents, knowing where they are? Being aware, seeing. It's like being a point guard. You got to see the floor.
Right.
And then, taking notes and then following up. I think, I used to laugh at some of the coaches in Vegas. We'd go out to the Vegas events, and, the last game started at, say, 9:30, and you'd see some of these coaches dressed up to go out afterwards. And I'm like, no. Afterwards, we're meeting as a staff to go over who we saw today, who we liked, ranking them, and who we're going to see tomorrow.
Right.
We're not going out on the town. We're working. And so being organized, and then organized, I used to have a template for my recruits, and it would have their name, phone number, high school coach, high school, the nicknames, their list of favorites, who's their favorite team, favorite food, favorite movie, favorite actor, actress, key contacts, and then log all the phone calls. So that way and then spellings, I'm big on spellings, like, John Smith. Well, don't assume it's John, and don't assume it's Smith. It might be, Jon, and it might be Symth, right? So ask the spelling. And sometimes you have some crazy names. I recruited a kid, James On Curry, played in the NBA from North Carolina. James On. How do you spell James On? All right. Is it James On? Is it one word? It was one word with a capital O. And it was combined names of his uncle and his dad, James and Leon, combined in one word. So you get that wrong, and it's offensive. Shows disrespect.
Right.
And I remember as a player, I got a letter from a prominent university that had my name as either Michael Doherty, instead of Matthew Doherty. That's just sloppy. So that shows disrespect. If you're doing that, then how are you going to run practice? How are you going to, it just,
trickle effect.
and so being organized, preparing for the phone call with the recruit, looking through your previous notes. What do you want to ask them? What do you want to get out of this? Are you adding value to the call? And then a little thing that I do today, and I talk to my clients, stand up. Stand up when you talk. And now you have the ability to use earbuds. So now you can free your hands. That creates more energy in a phone call than sitting down. So now you're pacing, walking around, writing. You can still write notes, especially with a stand-up desk. Write notes, take good notes but stay present in the conversation and be able to pivot when something comes up that you weren't maybe aware of. Oh, okay. And not sound too up or down. So I'm recruiting Jawad Williams. My first recruiting class at North Carolina, I think it was. And it's us, Maryland, boom, 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 a couple other schools. He's out of Ohio. And so we're done with the July recruiting period. It's August. So now we're like zeroing in on who we want, setting up home visits, campus visits, the whole deal. So, I'm on the phone, walking in my office in Chapel Hill at the Smith Center. And I said, so who do you like the most right now? And he said, Maryland. Now, I'm from New York. I'm pretty competitive. And I wanted to go through the phone and grab him by the neck. I take a deep breath and say, oh, great. Why? Well, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. I said, let me ask you a question. A couple questions. How many times did their head coach see you play this summer? I'll tell you. He saw you once. I said, how many times did I see you play? I saw you 26 times. How many handwritten notes have you gotten from him? One. How many you get from me? He says, I get one from you every day. FedEx. I said, who then do you think wants you more? Him or me? Oh, you do, coach. I said, okay. So, knowing your competition, what are they telling the recruit? Right? Getting that feedback. I tell a popular story. Duke was recruiting Vince Carter. Now, we're fourth out of 4 schools. North Carolina. I was at Kansas at the time, Florida State and Duke. And we had lost a kid the year before to Duke named Ricky Price. And, back then Duke was telling all the players, the wings, that they'll be the next Grant Hill. The point guard, your next Bobby Hurley. And the big guys, next Christian Laettner, right? They just won back-to-back championships. So you got to know what your competition's saying. So I'm down in Daytona trying to recruit Vince. And if we don't get him, we want North Carolina to get him because of Roy Williams and I association with North Carolina. And the coach said, Duke's, I said, what's Duke's telling him? And he said, they're telling him he's going to be the next Grant Hill. I said, interesting. Took that back to Coach Williams, right? Information, good information is power. So I take it back to Coach Williams, and then we go in on a home visit, and we really know we're in 4th place, so we just want to blow up the competition and help North Carolina. So we go in, and after some small talk, Coach Williams says, this is Vince's mother and Vince, we wouldn't even be here, but last year we were recruiting a young man named Ricky Price, and we felt we were in good position, and Duke came in the last minute and told him that he was going to be the next Grant Hill. And as soon as Coach Williams said that, Vince's mom went like this to Vince, and like
wide-eyed.
it just blew up the competition. I know. Your producer here, Matt, grew up in Durham, is a big Duke fan. So that's for you. That's for you, Matt. But so what is the competition saying to the recruit? I want to know.
Yeah.
How do you get that information? Well, one, you could ask. Two, ask the people around them. The people that surround that person, what are they telling them? Well, they're telling them that nowadays they're going to get them to the pros, and how much NIL money he's getting. What's he going to get? NIL money. Mm-hmm. Oh, he's going to get $250, $1 million. Okay, and now I know what I've got to commit to. Well, we can't give you $1 million. We'll give you 800, but maybe the next year we can give you $1 billion. I mean, I can't even imagine having those conversations with recruits nowadays, but that's reality.
Yeah. So most assistant coach, not all, but most are an assistant coach, and they have very soon visions of running their own program,
yes.
being their own head coach, no matter what the sport or level. When did you know you wanted to be a head coach? How long did that process take you? Because you came into this not really even considering coaching when you were.
Well, I think once I became, once I was at Davidson, I wanted to, explore places like Kansas, like North Carolina. I could have stayed with Bob McKillop forever, and it needed to be a special opportunity. And once I was at Kansas, Roy was putting out guys that were head coaches. Jerry Green went to Oregon. Kevin Stallings was with me 1 year, went to Illinois State. Steve Robinson went to Tulsa. So I kind of knew when I got there that I'd have a chance. And so I was, and Coach Williams was very good at giving us some responsibilities that would prepare us to be a head coach.
And you went into that knowing that this is a launching pad in a way, and I want to be launched.
Yeah, and he understands that.
Yeah.
Like you'll be here and you'll become a head coach someday.
Yeah.
And I remember interviewing certain jobs, a mid-major out west, a mid-major out east. And when I'd interview, I'd come back. He'd prepare me for the interview. Like I'd knock the interviews out because he prepared me.
Right.
And afterwards I'd say, this is, what do you think? He said, I'd wait. I trusted him. So I passed on these opportunities and passed on about 3 head coaching opportunities before I remember I couldn't get an interview at St. Louis, which really bothered me. And, being so close to Kansas, and I recruited St. Louis, and I'm like, maybe that was after my 6th year, 7th year. I'm like, maybe I waited too long. And then the next year, I interviewed at Notre Dame, became the head coach at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And so, and during that time, it's like Wayne Gretzky says, be there before you get there, anticipate where the puck's going. Kevin Eastman, was a great assistant in the NBA, talks about be there before you get there. I was keeping lists of potential assistant coaches while I was assistant at Kansas. So I'm like interviewing these guys while I'm on the road, bumping into them, watching how they worked. Like if I saw somebody who was lazy, sloppy, showed up to games late, wasn't watching the court, was taking, hanging out. I kept a list of guys that I would interview in certain parts of the country, or if I got a job like Notre Dame that's national, didn't matter. And Doug Wojcik was the #1 assistant in my mind at the time. He was at the Naval Academy, and he was working his tail off. And so right when I got the job offer from Notre Dame, I called Doug and said, I'd like you to join me in South Bend.
Yeah. Going back to Coach Williams, though, I had never heard that sort of story. That's probably not something that's widely publicized, how much he helped his assistants.
Oh, yeah.
And so philosophically, that's an important thing, I think, for a coach to decide, I'll probably have a coaching tree. How involved do I want to be in developing it, but also the time and devotion putting into a staff that's really going to hurt him in the near term, but but it's
Well,
sort of the
here's
right
the
thing
deal.
to do. That's
I
great.
talk about this with it's truly servant leadership,
Mhm.
but really it's you can look at it as the most selfish thing you could do, right? Why? Because now you have a loyalty amongst your staff.
Right.
You now will attract the best because, like, look what Nick Saban has done
Right.
when he was at Alabama. I mean, he was going through, these guys would,
Coordinators
yeah,
left and right. Right.
Sarkisian,
Mhm.
fired at USC, goes to Alabama, gets recycled,
Yeah.
and now is at Texas,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. Lane Kiffin, Kirby Smart.
yeah,
That's
all these guys.
Yeah.
And so, you know, by having the reputation, he's getting the best of the best to come in the door. And yes, I will prepare you, and you'll have an opportunity to become a head coach. And so now you have the best of the best knocking on your door, and you also create this community of coaches that will help. Like we helped with Vince Carter for Dean Smith because Dean Smith helped Roy Williams get the job at Kansas.
Right.
I mean, so you want that network, and it's the right thing to do. Also, you in business, you have to have succession planning. You want to continually think of, okay, what if somebody leaves? All right, who am I backfilling? How am I backfilling that position? Do I have an assistant, young assistant, maybe an operations person that I can promote? Am I grooming that person? So when I got hired, I was a position called the restricted earnings coach at Kansas. I was making $16,000 a year, 1 year, fortunately, and Coach Kevin Stallings left, so I slid over and took Kevin's spot in a full-time role, and so you build your pipeline not only of recruits but of assistant coaches.
Right.
So you've got to plan, and that's part of having a vision as a head coach. I talk about this in business. Yeah, 3 keys of the CEO is also the 3 keys of a head coach: casting a vision, driving a culture, and engaging in large business transactions. So, casting a vision. Where do you want to go as a program? Because if you don't know where you want to go, how can you lead people? 2, driving a culture, like Dean Smith did, like Roy Williams did. How are we going to play? We're going to play hard, play smart, play together. And then engage in large business transactions. Well, that's recruiting. That's making sure I have my staff scheduling. Those kind of things.
Right. So you go to Notre Dame, big stage for your first job.
Yeah.
A lot of coaches may have said, "I'm going to maybe jump be a mid-major head
Yeah.
coach or small Division I coach." You go to Notre Dame, a lot of spotlight, a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
What made you feel like you were ready for that kind of a jump?
Yeah, probably because Roy Williams said I was. I think that, and I talk about this, we need to, as an executive coach, we talk about peer advisory groups, and we talk about personal board of directors. So who is on your personal board of directors? Because we need encouragers in our lives. We need financial advice, spiritual advice, encouragers, and so somebody that can encourage you and say, you're ready, you got this. Because in the world of executive coaching, we talk about isolation relief and imposter syndrome. Am I good enough?
Right.
Am I good enough to do this? And, when someone like Roy Williams says, yeah, you're ready, you got this. And we had the blueprint. Like I had the blueprint of the North Carolina-Kansas system that I was going to lay down at Notre Dame and tweak it accordingly. But I had the blueprint. And so I just had to do what he did. But there's different pressures that come with that.
And at Notre Dame, 22 wins your first season, go to the NIT championship game. At that point, before you get the call from UNC or that opened up, were you feeling like, hey, this is a place I think I could build a career here? Where, there was not a dissatisfaction.
No, not at all. I loved it. I loved the players. I loved the AD, Kevin White, who ended up going to Duke. I love Kevin White. At the time, Bubba Cunningham was the assistant AD, who is now at North Carolina. The culture there, the vibe on campus, the students were awesome. The people, it's a real supportive, loving community. And being Irish Catholic just was icing on the cake. Yeah, the only thing that's a challenge there was the weather.
Right.
But we play indoors.
Right. So then the call from UNC comes, your alma mater, and a lot of coaches, I think, would sort of dream of that scenario. That I get to go back and coach where I played, and it's a great school, great tradition in my sport, basketball. So can you just walk through the process? And I'm on behalf of other coaches who are either have gone through this and didn't do it right, or are thinking about when this call comes, whatever their version of the dream is. How did you go through that process? What was the thought process? I got to make a tough decision to leave a great place for another great place.
Yeah.
Walk us through that.
Wow. That was very hard. You know, I remember flying back from the interview in Chapel Hill with my wife on a private jet from Chapel Hill to Indiana. And I said to my wife, I said, you know, I could be the head coach at Notre Dame or I could be the head coach at North Carolina. And that's a burden. It's a blessing, but it's a burden.
That's why I asked the question, because a lot of coaches in conversations with us that question is, should I do this?
Right.
What is the right thing to do? And that's almost an impossible question to answer.
And, you know, the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, the grass isn't always greener. I think the hard thing in coaching is that you really only get to interview the other side for 48 hours. And you can't uncover and open up the closets where the skeletons are.
Right.
And, you know, it's just like a recruit committing to you, right? He doesn't see everything. You don't let him see behind the curtain.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, even though, to use that analogy, you lived in the house for a couple of years as a player.
Yeah.
But still.
Yeah, I didn't, you know, I didn't know everything.
Right.
And thought I did. And then there's a dynamics that go into play that you don't have at other places, you know. And I think that, you know, what are those dynamics? You know, like I think of Danny Hurley comes to mind, you know, stayed at UConn, could have gone to the Lakers. It's hard to turn that down. Money, prestige, you know. But
so as you were talking with your wife, sort of what was that conversation when you really were up against having that 48 hours or so to make the decision?
Yeah, I went back and forth. I mean, I'd wake up and I'd walk downstairs in my Carolina shorts, and then the next morning I'd come down with my Notre Dame shorts. And, you know, I think that a couple things. One, North Carolina was home, not only to me, even though I'm from Long Island, but home. And my wife is from North Carolina. And that it's the best of the best. And you could win a national championship there a lot easier than you can win at other places.
Right.
And so, and then lastly, like I took the chance to play at North Carolina, I could have played it safe and went to a smaller school and been maybe, you know, Princeton or school. Holy Cross was, you know, back then was good, and maybe been one of the best players to play at those schools. But I would have thought, I literally thought, like, I don't want to be in my dorm room watching North Carolina cut down the nets and knowing that I could have been a part of that. So I didn't want to live with regret of not trying and challenging myself to be the best.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to be afraid. And and I think, you know, combination of a lot of those things is why I took the job.
Yeah.
And also, Michael Jordan called me, and this is Coach Smith's recruiting. Michael called me and said, if you don't take this job, Coach Smith will go outside the family and hire. He named another coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want that coach taking the job. And that was the deciding factor for me.
Yeah.
I did not want a non-Tar Heel coaching our program. And so I took it. That was the thing that pushed me over the edge.
Yeah. So coming in...
And I think Coach Smith knew what button to push.
Right, probably. Coming in after Coach Smith in some way, he was the legend there.
Bill Guthridge was there 3 years.
Right. Yeah. And so, but still you have the shadow of Dean Smith and just the tradition.
And they were in the building.
Right.
They were in the building. They had offices
right.
downstairs. Yeah.
Right. So coaching at a place, for any coach, taking over a program that historically has been great, and in a sense, there's nowhere to go but down. You have to really, the charge is you maintain this level of excellence.
Yeah. In
retrospect, or looking back now on coaching careers, not just yours, but others, is that the right move? Or is it, I go to a place where I can win and I build it and take them up so that there is more patience, there's more, I have more freedom to build it my way as opposed to maintain the aura or the tradition. Again, no matter what sport, what school, they're small or large, they all have an aspect of that.
That's right.
What's your feeling on that?
Well, looking back, I remember playing golf with Michael Jordan a couple of years ago, and we went to dinner afterwards, and we talked about it. He said, he started laughing. He said, "You should have stayed at Notre Dame." And hindsight, it's 2020, right?
Right.
And so, I could have stayed at Notre Dame. And would I have made it the Final Four? Would I have ever won a national championship? Would that have mattered? Would I have been satisfied with being really good? Like Mike Beret had a hell of a career. Never made it to the Final Four, but had a all-time winning coach at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Would I have been happy with that versus not taking the chance at North Carolina? Well, looking back, it'd be like, yeah, probably. Probably would have had a better quality of life. Probably would have won a lot. Who's to know? Wouldn't have gotten fired at Notre Dame after 4 years, And that's where my faith has to come into play.
Right.
Like spirituality. I know the conversation I think I'm going to have with God when hopefully I go to heaven. That's the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I get up there, I'm going to be like, yo, God, 2003, what happened? Wait a second. I know what happened. Let me tell you what I think happened. Too much, too fast, too soon. I was losing focus on you and my family, and you smacked me in the head because you want to repurpose me in other ways. And I think he's going to say, just nod. Mm-hmm. Okay, next. And so it's hard. Like even today, I get triggered emotionally by watching. Like North Carolina recently played Notre Dame in South Bend, won on basically the last 4 seconds shot.
4-point play.
4-point play. I was the head coach of both places.
Yeah.
And I'm 62. I could still be coaching at one of those two places, making $5 million a year. Why?
Yeah.
Why God? And maybe because God needed to humble me. Maybe God said, you know what, if you do this, you might get a divorce, or you will lose your relationship with your kids, or I need you to be an executive coach and be on this show with Dan Tudor so you can, educate other young leaders in the world of not only sports but business.
Right. So 1 year at UNC, let go, and we're not going to get into all the machinations of that. There's plenty, that people can Google or watch, or all sorts of interviews you've done. You've been very transparent about that whole process. So we'll leave that there. Because I want to focus on now the lessons. So you have rising coaches that are going through the same decision-making process that you had to do. if you had to do it all over again, you sort of hinted at this, but what would you do differently, or how would you just approach, even if it was the same decision, how would you approach that whole thing differently now?
Wow, great question.
Coaches.
Yeah, if I even like, let's assume I took the North Carolina job, what would I have done differently? You're in such a rush, things are going crazy. I took the job July 11th. That's when it was announced. Now think about that. The calendar. Why? Why was it July 11th? And I look back and I said, why? Why did Coach Guthridge retire in the middle of June, end of June? And most coaches retire, heck, now they're retiring in the middle of the season, before the season starts. And I think that, there was going to be a pretty seamless transition between Coach Guthridge and Roy Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And then Roy Williams decided to stay at Kansas. And so that took like a week. And then, I remember when Coach Guthridge retired, I was playing golf with Doug Wojcik in South Bend, Indiana. Finally got a chance to relax. Camp's over, crazy year, just moving and putting a staff together. We had a good recruiting class. And then for some reason I checked my phone and I see a call from 919 and I check it. And it said Bill Guthridge announced his retirement. And I'm like, oh my God, let a foursome play through. Then I go to hit the ball, I skull it again. I'm like, my mind is mush.
Right.
And so anyway, I took the job July 11th. I wouldn't recommend that. Now, Mike Bragg took the Notre Dame job after that, but I think, and I wrote a book called Rebound from Pain to Passion, and I talk about this. One of the biggest challenges for anybody is managing change. So managing change. And understanding, I talk about the 6 No's of leadership. And I made up an acronym called
KNOWS. Yeah.
And this STEVID, I made up some name of a Eastern European basketball player that I was recruiting named STEVID. You got to know yourself. It's your biggest strength, your biggest weakness. You got to know your team. How do you communicate? Not everybody likes to receive information the same way. You got to know your environment. Politics is real. What's the political environment landscape of that program? All right, we'll go back to that.
And institution.
The vision. What is the vision that you have? What is the vision of the program? The industry. You got to know your industry, right? You got to be an industry expert. And then lastly, you got to know the truth. You got to mine for the truth. I wasn't great at that. So going back to knowing myself, I like to act quickly. Sometimes I make, quick decisions. And then, that time, you didn't have a lot of time. I had to make this decision. And knowing myself now better, I would have handled that better. Mm. I would have managed up to Dean Smith better. Mm. I would have gone slower with change. It was a shock to the system of North Carolina. Like, I asked the athletic director, all right, can I bring my staff with me? My first year we're going to be good. My second year will be bad. My third year we'll be rebuilding. Are you tough enough to get through with me? Is it my program to run as I see fit? Yes, yes, yes. Dean Smith told me it's my program to run it how I see fit. And all respect to him, he didn't mean, ultimately, I guess he felt I would do what he wanted. Mm. I was a recruit at that time.
Right.
And he was desperate. Like that. There wasn't much of a backup. Like, he needed me. So I brought my staff with me.
Yeah.
It was June 11th. I couldn't leave them out in the cold. So I told the AD, I said, listen, if I can't bring my staff with me, I'm going to stay at Notre Dame. And he said, no, you can bring them. I said, okay. So that meant I couldn't retain Phil Ford, Pat Sullivan, and Dave Hanners, all three former players. So when that occurred, Dean Smith was quoted after my press conference that it felt like a funeral. Not a good way to start off your career as the head coach of North Carolina when the legendary coach says it feels like a funeral.
Right.
But yet I told the AD, I'm going to bring my staff with me. So what should we have done? We should have figured out a way to have both, keep both. I should have said, for the sake of the program, understanding how important former players are and how important it is to Dean Smith, I will keep Phil Ford, Dave Hanners, and Pat Sullivan on staff. I will bring my assistants in a support role in some capacity. We'll grow the staff, and they'll get paid the same that they were getting paid at Notre Dame. All right? So now they're not without a job.
Right.
And then ideally, Phil, Dave, and Pat end up getting head coaching jobs somewhere, and then these guys are backfilled, but they're not left out in the cold.
Right.
I should have done that. Now, my staff might not have liked it, but I was taught to be loyal by Dean Smith. Loyalty, family. Well, that's my family.
Right.
And I didn't want to throw them out. But sometimes you can be blindly loyal that I put them in harm's way. And I think as a leader, you have to see a bigger picture and the vision. I put us all in harm's way by bringing us out. Now I was considered an outsider, and I didn't have the leverage that Roy had.
Right.
When Roy took over, he didn't hire any former players. He brought in Joe Holliday, Jared Hass, Steve Robinson, and CB McGrath, all ties to Kansas. And I would joke, well, Bill Guthridge didn't play at North Carolina when Dean Smith hired him, but that was a different day.
Right.
And so there was an expectation. And I think the understanding the politics of the job is like, I felt like if I could just recruit and coach and win, everything takes care of itself. Well, it does, but you better do it at a high level.
Right.
And then once there was some dissension and it got to the players, then I couldn't get my arms wrapped around it.
Right. And I mean, getting fired, let go in college coaching is almost a rite of passage.
Yeah.
So it's not, that it's, I think if you go into this profession, you're going to have to expect that might happen at some point. A lot of coaches sort of pre-dwell on that. I don't want to get fired, and so they get very timid and are afraid to take risks. Or they get fired and have a hard time bouncing back. Could you just talk very quickly, advice to them on just the idea of sort of accepting that that's part of the job, and also not letting it handcuff you or psychologically bind you to just playing it so safe that it almost increases the chances that you're going to get fired?
No, I mean, and I think I'm in executive coaching. I think the people that could really use, this sounds self-serving, my services are college basketball and football coaches, right? Because I've been there, and it's isolation relief. And what we say to ourselves, I talked about, personal board of directors, and you need to surround yourself with people and encouragers. Well, the person you're around the most is ourselves. And the things we can say to ourselves are awful. We say things to ourselves we wouldn't say to our worst enemy. So what are you saying to yourself? Are you journaling? Most successful people do three things in the morning. They pray, they journal, and they exercise. And I jokingly say I can do two of the three. I'll pray and I'll journal. I'm not exercising in the morning. And so the journaling and the praying, can relieve some of the stress. And, what are you saying to yourself? And I think that's so important to keep things in perspective. And they can say some nasty things to themselves and get caught up and spun up and be so tight that they don't. I call it an executive presence, the demeanor of a leader. Matter of fact, my newsletter I do each month, that is written. It'll come out in April, I think. the demeanor of a leader. So how can you show up? How do you show up? Are you poised? Are you under control? Or are you uptight and edgy and have a temper? And there were times I had a temper and I was edgy. And your biggest strength's your biggest weakness. Well, my strength was that I was edgy and I was intense. I was driven. I was competitive. That was the only way this 6'7" non-athlete was going to play at North Carolina. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, your biggest strength's your biggest weakness. So now I get into being a coach, and you have to have that executive presence. And, you know, if I lost my temper in practice, and, you know, it's not it's not a good thing most of the time.
Right.
Once in a while, but if you're doing it on a regular basis, it's not good. So I had to learn after I got let go at North Carolina. I went on a leadership journey and studied at places like UVA and Wharton and learn emotional intelligence and become a better leader, managing and leading through core values.
And you mentioned your book earlier, Rebound from Pain to Passion. Highly recommended to a coach, really valuable insights. And so we'll let that sort of do the explaining of just all the things you had to sort of work through and how you rebounded, literally. But one of the things that you just mentioned, which I wanted to get your thoughts on, you did something that most fired coaches don't do, which is go back to business school.
Yeah.
What drove you to that? And what the motivation, and then what did you learn from that? What was the takeaway? Because it sounds like that was one of the life-changing events for you.
This goes back to having a personal board of directors. Bob Bodine, a friend of mine, he's a national search guy in college athletics, talks about the personal board of directors. And on my personal board of directors has been and always will be a guy named John Black, businessman, financial advisor here in Charlotte. So when I got let go at North Carolina, he was in Nashville. My wife called him. He jumped on a plane and flew right to Chapel Hill, and just to give us some advice, some counsel. And after the dust settled, I'm like, what should I do? You know, I was like, well, you know, do TV. But he said, you know, take a year off and go on a sabbatical and study leadership. He said, because people will want to know what you did with that time off, and what did you learn, how'd you get better? Because rightly or wrongly, there's a lot of things written about me that were negative about me as a leader. And so there was stuff I would have to overcome in my next job. And so not only optically this would look good, but also I would learn something.
Right.
And so I'm pretty coachable. If you tell me to work on my left hand, I'll work on my left hand and be better than my right hand. So I went, and he studied under a lady named Carol Weber at UVA, the Darden School. So I signed up for her class. I after taking a half-day executive session with her and went over Myers-Briggs assessments, and she coached me for half a day, and then I took her class. I took a class at Wharton. These are executive classes, just 1 week classes. And met a lady named Fran Johnston. We studied out of the book, The Art of Emotional Intelligence, Primal Leadership, The Art of Emotional Intelligence. First time I ever heard about emotional intelligence, 2003. And so then I worked with a couple of other executive coaches. And
that whole process, you felt
Jerry
like
Bell was another one.
Made you better for the next coaching jobs that you would
no
have,
question.
because you had a long coaching career after what we're talking about.
Yeah, no question. So I take this class, and I remember I was publicly crucified as being a bad leader. And at that point, I felt like you're a born leader or you're not. And when I was reading Primal Leadership in this class, one of the most impactful things I've ever read, it said, leadership is a learned behavior. That was the most exciting thing I've ever read in my life. Now there was hope, like I could get better. And so I go back to being curious. And Fran Johnson, I became my executive coach. She allowed me to work with her on a monthly basis. She was in Philadelphia. I was here in Charlotte. I'd get on a plane once a month on my own dime, fly to Philly in the morning, meet with her, fly back that evening, and work with her. And so I really embraced the emotional intelligence thing and realized that not everybody, when I studied with Carol Weber, took the Myers-Briggs assessment, she said, Matt, you're an ENTJ. And I said to myself, I've been called a lot of four-letter words before, but never an ENTJ. And she said only 2% of the population are ENTJs. And I start to sit up in my chair like, you know what? North Carolina just got rid of an elite coach. I'm 2%.
So for people not familiar with Myers-Briggs, ENTJ.
Yeah, it means extrovert, intuitive, trusting, judgmental. So there's 16 categories in this personality assessment. And so the ENTJ is only 2% of the population are ENTJs. So I'm thinking, I walked in there beaten up, emotionally beaten up after losing my job a couple of months earlier. And then she starts saying, I'm 2% of the population. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a badass, right? North Carolina just got fired an elite coach. And that's what I was kind of thinking. And she said, no, you don't get it. She goes, that means 98% of the population don't think like you think. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So that was the journey with emotional intelligence that, and leadership is ongoing. You never arrive as a leader. I say it's like football. You get to the red zone, you think you're going to score, at least a field goal. And somebody pushes a button and extends the field another 100 yards. That's leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership is like golf. You birdie 9, you're under par on the front side, you're feeling good about yourself, you think you're going to have a career day.
That's when it starts going downhill.
You go to
usually.
10th tee and you hit it out of bounds. That's leadership. And that's why I call a leadership practice. Like I never understood why doctors and lawyers called it medical practice, legal practice. Well, there are new things evolving all the time. You never perfect it. You have to practice.
Right.
And perfection's your goal, but you'll settle with excellence. And hopefully that's what you get.
Yeah. Pain to passion, rebound, pain to passion, that's the subtitle.
Yeah.
The pain part, I think you've touched on that,
Yeah.
and I think quite a bit. For coaches listening who are starting to think, okay, wow, I'm not the only one who's either stressed out or worried or I got fired and I am a poor leader and everything. What is your advice to them to get past that pain?
Talk to me. I listen to Pastor Gary Hamrick from Cornerstone Chapel in Leesburg, Virginia. He's got a big following. And this past Sunday, the sermon was on suffer well. And he was writing about Paul and 2 Corinthians and how he suffered well. So what is God trying to tell you when you go through this? And, is it happening to me or is it happening for me? It's a mindset. Nelson Mandela, one of my favorite quotes is, I never lose, I either win or I learn. So what are you learning? What did you learn about yourself and how can you get better? And that's why I love to talk about failure, because we all fail.
Right.
It's just some people do it on a national stage and others do it in the privacy of their own home or office.
Right.
We're all going to fail. And so learn from it.
Right.
And grow from it. That's the motto of my company is learn and grow.
And one of the things, the concepts you've talked about before in the book and other places, the concept of befriending change. So that's sort of the same concept that you just
embrace change.
So embrace it. But what does that, for a coach, again, what does that mean?
Well, geez.
Because I would say, as a population, a lot of coaches don't like to change.
Well,
naturally.
Humans don't like to change.
Right, exactly, yes.
We're all creatures of habit. But now, if you don't like to change, you should not be a coach. I like change. If I was leading it, I didn't like to be told what to do unless I'm being led by somebody I really love and respect.
Right.
And so, if you don't like change, then you're dealing with the NIL. You don't like change, you're dealing with the transfer portal. You're dealing with change every semester because you probably won't have the same roster from one semester to the other. So you better embrace change.
Right.
And so how are you going to change your squad? How are you going to build for the future? How are you dealing with the ever-changing NIL landscape? If you don't like change, you're in the wrong profession.
Going through everything that you went through as a coach, how has all that made you a better person? Because you've touched on that a little bit throughout this talk.
Yeah. I think I'm more self-aware. I do pray every day. I do journal every day. I'm more aware of my triggers. I realize my biggest strength is also my biggest weakness, and I try to avoid those triggers. It goes back to playing in the park. Like, if you walked in the park and you showed any disrespect, I'd want to kick your ass, on the court.
The competitiveness. Yeah.
And so if I feel challenged, that triggers that emotion, but it might be like, somebody trying to cut me off, in the line of TSA. How stupid is that? Like, so can you turn that off? So there was this great speaker, a great executive coach that I follow, and he has, I'm drawing a blank on his name. His formula is E plus R equals O, where E is the event, R is your reaction, and O is the outcome. And the only thing we control is our reaction.
Right.
So the event, somebody cuts you off on the highway, you react and honk your horn, and then he pulls out a gun and shoots you in the head.
Right.
Now, if you didn't honk your horn, he wouldn't shoot you in the head. Obviously, extreme case.
Right.
But my point is, you control your not only reaction. I take it a step further and call it response, because reaction comes from the low part of the brain, the fight or flight. Response comes from the top part of the brain. So moving your input from here to here. And you can do that. It takes discipline. It takes maturity. So when I'm a young head coach, I'm fiery, and I think that this is the way to, get after it. You can still be intense, be demanding, but don't be demeaning. Don't be disrespectful. And so now I utilize my core values of RTCP: respect, trust, commitment, positivity. I didn't have those when I was coaching at North Carolina. I had those when I was at SMU.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember a player, I tell this story all the time. I had a player who wasn't going to class, and I asked the assistant to send him up to my office, conference room. And on the conference room, we had this limestone that was the foundation, the cornerstone of our organization. And every player signed it, and it had SMU basketball, RTC back then. It was just respect, trust, commitment, and the year. So he sat down across from me. I said, "Did you sign this stone?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, what are our core values?" He said, "Respect, trust, commitment." I said, "Well, you're not going to class." And he dropped his head. I said, "So you're not showing respect to the mandatory class attendance rule. 2, I thought you were going to class, but you're not, so you broke my trust. And 3, you're obviously not committed to getting your education.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were me, what would you do?" And he said, "I'd suspend me." I said, "Okay, you're suspended, and we both walked out the door towards practice. And I can imagine what went on in the locker room, where the guys probably said, "What happened? What happened?" And Coach was actually kind of cool. He asked me the core values, and I kind of suspended myself. Like, that's how you drive culture. When I was at North Carolina, Notre Dame, if that would have happened, I would have waited till pre-practice circle, and I would have blasted him in front of the team because I was in charge, and he disrespected me, and it would have been all about me, and that would have been my insecurity as a leader. And it would have felt good for about 30 seconds, and then the fallout would be they'd feel sorry for the player, and they'd be looking at me saying, what a jerk.
Yeah. And is that going to happen to me next?
Yeah. And so leadership is a learned behavior.
Yeah.
It took a while for me it took the trauma. It said your life's impacted by three things: the people you meet, the books you read, the trauma in your life. And I talked about John Black, people I meet. He helped me on the road to leadership. Books, primal leadership, trauma, losing my job. And so, I'm better off for all those things. Painful as hell, but from pain to passion. So leadership is my passion. And the reason I wrote that book, and I'm an executive coach, is I want to do what you're doing with your show, is helping other people avoid the landmines I stepped on.
Yeah. When you mentioned the executive leadership and what you're doing now, we're actually going to get into that in a different segment. So for the coaches listening and watching, Tudor University, we will have a separate conversation about not only what Coach Doherty does now, but also the things that he's learning and doing there that apply directly to college coaching and being successful, because it's really about building an organization, and that's what you're helping people do now.
100%.
So that's going to be over on Tudor University. But Coach, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
For spending so much time being really transparent about that, and I know it's benefited a lot of coaches.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.